Some losses don't just hurt, they humiliate you. One day you're standing at a graveside trying to hold yourself together, and the next you're watching your own family turn grief into a courtroom, a stage, a verdict. We've all had moments like that where you're not even begging for money, you're begging to still matter. And the people closest to you make you feel invisible on purpose. But I want us to walk into today's story with a little quiet in our chest. Not to cheer for anyone's downfall and not to point fingers like we've never been messy or scared. Just to notice something simple. Sometimes the door that slams in your face isn't the end. It's the moment you stop asking to be chosen and start choosing yourself. Because in this story, a grandfather dies without a will. A father smirks and says, "You won't get a single cent. Your brother will be the next heir." And right when it feels like the world has decided your place, a mother shows up in the middle of the night, presses an envelope into your hand and whispers, "It's time to tell them who you really are." Stay with me. You'll want to hear what was inside. My name is Caius Calloway, and I'm about to tell you the truth I've been swallowing for most of my life. But before I share my story, I want to know you're here with me and listening. Comment hi below or tell me where you're watching from. Sometimes knowing someone is there makes all the difference, especially when the people who were supposed to love you try to erase you. And if you can please subscribe, not just for me, but because stories like this only survive when somebody chooses to stay and hear them out. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. There's something about a funeral in Savannah that feels heavier than death itself. The air clings to your skin like wet linen, thick with moss and old ghosts. I stood inside St. Bartholomew's, a centuries-old church in the historic district, listening to the low murmur of prayers, but none of them could reach me. My fingers gripped the edge of my grandfather's casket longer than they should have. The wood was cold, polished, final. Silas Calloway wasn't just my grandfather, he was the man who taught me how to build from the ground up, how to survive, how to mean something. I grew up believing that if I worked hard enough, learned the trade, earned it brick by brick, the legacy he built would be mine to carry forward. That belief was the last thing I had left. I scanned the pews. Dean. My father worked the room like a goddamn politician, shaking hands, nodding somberly, whispering just enough to appear dignified. He'd always known how to manipulate grief into advantage. Across the aisle, Rhett, my older brother by 2 years, sat polished, unreadable, too dry-eyed for a man burying the family patriarch. But he wasn't watching the casket. He was watching everyone else. Calculating, measuring. I thought about something Grandpa Silas once told me while we were laying the foundation for the Edgewater project. Real legacy starts with fairness. Not blood, not title. Fairness. That day I believed him. That day he looked at me like I was the future. But today I couldn't find that version of him in the silence of this church. The sky opened as we moved to Bonaventure Cemetery, a southern Gothic sprawl of marble angels and leaning headstones shaded by moss-laced oaks. Rain fell in sheets. I didn't open my umbrella. I needed to feel it, needed to stay tethered. Dean rested his hand on Rhett's shoulder, leaned in, and muttered something just loud enough for me to catch fragments. Board meeting, a transfer, formal announcement. It didn't sound like mourning. It sounded like a damn rollout. After the burial, I thought we'd be left to grieve. Instead, Holden Pike, the family lawyer, ushered us downtown to his office like it was just another stop on the itinerary. His building sat like a relic on Whitaker Street, dim lighting, dark wood paneling, and that scent of old money and older secrets. I sat in the conference room, drenched and silent, still clinging to the idea that maybe, just maybe, Silas had left behind something with my name on it. Holden adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and said, "There is no will." Just like that. No hesitation. No apology. I stared at him. My chest burned. Dean didn't even wait for the air to settle. By default, he said, voice smooth and surgical, "The estate falls to me. And as for you..." He looked at me like I was nothing more than noise. "You won't get a single cent. Rhett will be the next heir." Rhett leaned back, grinning like a man trying on a suit tailored to power. "Try not to be too disappointed, baby brother. There's always dignity in stepping aside." I said nothing. I scanned the room. One of the board members looked down. Another shifted uncomfortably. Holden wouldn't meet my eyes. That was the tell. His voice had been too clean, too memorized. Grandpa Silas was a man of exacting control. He scheduled quarterly trust reviews down to the minute. There was no way he'd simply forget to leave a will. So why lie, and if Dean had already won, if it was truly that cut and dry, why gloat? Why rub salt in a wound that shouldn't even matter to him anymore? I left that office as a ghost of myself. The man who walked in had a legacy. The one who walked out had nothing. But one thing was certain. The grief of losing my grandfather had just been hijacked and turned into something else. This wasn't about death anymore. This was war. And they'd just declared it. The next morning I stepped into Callaway Built with one last shred of hope in my chest that the company at least would remember what I'd done for it. That the work I'd poured my soul into would be my anchor. I didn't need titles or money, just purpose. But hope dies quietly. From the moment I passed through the glass doors, everything felt off. The receptionist who used to greet me by name kept her eyes on her screen. My badge worked, but barely. The elevators paused, stalled like the building itself was reluctant to let me in. When I reached my floor, I found my name stripped from the office door. Inside, drawers emptied, files, missing screens locked. Every project I'd spearheaded, the waterfront complex, the mixed-use renovation on Victory Drive, had been reassigned. Rhett's name showed up where mine used to be. No one said it out loud, but I was already gone. I left the building and drove straight to the Riverside development site. Jewel Navarro, the site manager I'd mentored, looked up as I approached. "You okay?" she asked quietly, glancing over her shoulder. I nodded, but inside I was drowning. The site was a mess. Materials misordered, measurements misaligned. I crouched near the foundation wall and ran my fingers over a mislaid slab. It was a rookie mistake, one that could delay the entire project. And I knew exactly how to fix it because I'd been the one to design the contingency plans. That's what I did. I solved. I showed up. I delivered. So how the hell had I been erased? An email pinged. Mandatory board meeting. No subject line, no agenda. Just a location and time. 3:00 p.m. Too soon after the funeral. Too precise to be anything but calculated. I walked into the top floor conference room and it hit me like a punch. Dean at the head of the table, Rhett in the seat Silas used to occupy. The rest were a mix of familiar and unfamiliar faces, shareholders, legal counsel, a few longtime board members. Dean stood and announced, effective immediately, all operational authority will transition to Rhett. Caius will step away from his role to allow for a more disciplined leadership structure. Rhett smirked. Nothing personal. You've always had passion. But we're running a business, not a therapy group. I looked around. One woman bit her lip. Another man looked down. No one interrupted. No one questioned. But I started taking mental notes. Dean had mentioned prepared legal documents. That meant paperwork. Paperwork meant timestamps. If they'd planned this before Silas died, it would show. And if it showed, I could prove intent. I could prove betrayal. I didn't argue. I let them think they'd won, because sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's setup. I left the office numb. Back in my apartment, I opened one of the old boxes I'd kept from my grandfather's house. There was a framed photo, Silas and me, in front of the first property we restored together. A letter opener with his initials, and the gold watch he wore every single day for 40 years. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, listening to the city hum through the windows. My life was disassembling in real time, and I had nothing to hold it together except fragments. Then came the knock. I opened the door, and there she was, Mary Ann, my mother. I hadn't seen her in months. Her coat was soaked. Her hands trembled. She didn't speak right away. Just stepped inside, eyes darting like she expected someone to follow. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed envelope, thick-aged, wax-stamped. Her voice was barely a whisper. "It's time to tell them who you really are." My throat dried. "Mom." "What are you talking about?" She swallowed hard. Your grandfather didn't forget you. He knew what was coming. He left this for you, to protect you. I stared at the envelope. It felt heavy. Final. She looked at me, tears in her eyes. You have to be careful. They'll come after you if they know what you hold. After she left, I sat at the table again, envelope in hand. The seal stared back at me like an eye. Part of me wanted to tear it open. The other part knew once I did nothing would ever be the same again. I didn't sleep. I sat at the small kitchen table while the city outside my window slowly faded from night into a gray, uneasy dawn. The envelope stayed in the center of the table untouched, like it was breathing. My mother's voice replayed over and over in my head. We don't have much time. Keep it like your life depends on it. Every instinct told me that once I broke that seal, there was no going back. Whatever was inside wouldn't just explain my past. It would rewrite it. I kept thinking about the other option, putting the envelope in a drawer, going quiet, letting Dean and Rhett erase me completely. That path promised safety, at least on the surface. But it also promised a slow burial. I'd already felt what it was like to be written out of my own name. I couldn't survive that twice. When the first light slid across the countertop, I finally picked up the envelope. The wax seal cracked with a soft snap that felt far too loud in the stillness. My hands were shaking when I unfolded the first page. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Silas. Strong, deliberate strokes. Familiar enough to make my chest tighten. Caius. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and the people I warned you about have already started moving. I need you to breathe before you read the rest. What I'm about to tell you isn't meant to hurt you. It's meant to protect you. I read every line slowly, like if I rushed, I might miss something that could save me. He wrote that he didn't trust Dean to honor his wishes, not now, not ever. He wrote that power had hollowed Dean out years ago, long before money did. He wrote that Calloway built was never meant to be an inheritance passed by blood alone, but a responsibility passed to someone who understood work, consequence, and restraint. And he named me as that person. Not out of sentiment, out of choice. This isn't about money, Silas wrote. It's about the foundation. Everything I built will collapse if it's held by someone who sees people as tools. If anyone ever tells you there was no will, understand this clearly. It won't be because I failed to prepare. It will be because someone made it disappear. By the time I reached the end of the letter, my eyes burned. He hadn't just believed in me. He had anticipated betrayal. He had planned for it. The second document stopped my breath entirely. It was a certified amendment attached to my birth records. Legal, formal, cold in the way official truth always is. My name was there in black ink. Caius Wren Calloway. Under Father Dean's name wasn't listed. Instead, there was a blank line followed by a notarized declaration signed years later by Silas himself, formally recognizing me as his legal descendant and heir by acknowledgement, not assumption. I sat back dizzy. The room felt smaller, louder. Suddenly, everything in my life rearranged itself into a pattern I couldn't unsee. Dean's distance. His contempt disguised as discipline. The way he never called me son when no one was listening. The reason Rhett was always placed one step ahead of me no matter how hard I worked or how much I delivered. I wasn't the spare. I was the reminder. A living proof of something Dean wanted buried. The last page was shorter. A statement Silas had written separately, witnessed and dated, not a formal will, but something meant to survive even if the rest vanished. It referenced a completed estate plan and distribution instructions that had been stored securely tied to his longtime legal counsel. If those documents were ever said to not exist, Silas instructed the absence itself should be treated as evidence. Not of negligence. Of interference. That's when fear finally caught up to me. If someone was willing to erase a legal document that powerful, they wouldn't hesitate to discredit me or intimidate anyone who stood near the truth. I packed a bag before the sun was fully up. I made copies of only what I absolutely needed, left the originals sealed, and drove straight to my mother's house on the outskirts of Savannah. On the way, I stopped at a red light and realized something quietly terrifying. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was holding something that could dismantle the entire structure Dean had built around himself. And to use it, I couldn't act like a son. I had to act like a plaintiff. By the time I pulled into Marianne's driveway, I knew my next steps. I needed a lawyer Dean didn't own. I needed proof that a will had existed. And I needed to start thinking in timelines, records, and witnesses. Family was no longer my language. Evidence was. I didn't open the envelope again that day. I didn't need to. Its weight was already inside me. Living at my mother's house felt like stepping into a different rhythm of time. Quieter. Slower. But beneath that calm, we both understood we were exposed. The first thing I told her was that nothing would exist in only one place anymore. Every document would be copied, every file logged, originals locked away, conversations held in neutral spaces, no confrontations, no messages that could be twisted. If Dean wanted to paint me as unstable, I wasn't going to give him a single brushstroke. We split responsibility without drama. She kept the original envelope secured. I kept dated copies scanned and backed up in places no one would think to look. From that moment on, survival meant structure. I met Graham Lark 3 days later at a quiet cafe near Forsyth Park, far from the polished offices downtown. He didn't look like Dean's kind of lawyer. No tailored arrogance. No polished smile, just sharp eyes and a habit of listening longer than most people talk. I laid everything out for him in order, starting with the funeral and ending with the envelope. I didn't editorialize. I didn't plead. I just told the story the way it happened. Graham didn't promise me anything. He told me the truth. What you have is strong, he said. But strength isn't enough. Courts don't rule on belief, they rule on sequence. If we want to win, we have to prove 2 things. That a formal estate plan existed, and that someone made it disappear. He sketched the case like a blueprint. First a timeline, Silas's health, his meetings with legal counsel, the date of death, the date the estate was declared without instructions. Second, witnesses, anyone who had seen the documents, anyone who had access to storage or safes. Third motive, financial shifts, internal company changes, any movement that showed preparation rather than reaction. Then he paused and looked at his screen. There's something else, he said. Holden Pike has represented interests tied to Dean before. Not openly, but enough to raise questions about independence. It didn't mean guilt, but it meant proximity. That was when I understood the shape of the lie. No will hadn't been a discovery. It had been an announcement. I returned to Callaway Built briefly, not to argue, not to reclaim anything, just to observe. The system told the story for me. Projects reassigned within 48 hours. Access revoked before formal notices were sent. Jules met me near the service elevator and whispered what she could without exposing herself. Meetings that never hit the calendar. Instructions passed verbally. A cleanup done too efficiently to be spontaneous. As I was leaving, Tessa Whitmore stepped beside me. She didn't look at me directly, just said low and careful. If you're going legal, don't focus only on the company. Look at the last time Silas met with Holden. Timing matters. That sentence stayed with me all the way back to my mother's house. Graham and I talked that night. Requests to file, records to pull, names inside Holden's office, financial movements worth questioning. This wasn't about proving Dean was cruel. It was about proving intent. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel humiliated. I felt focused. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was building something. And somewhere out there, someone knew exactly what had happened to Silas's will. I just had to find the person who could say it out loud. I walked into that diner on Route 17 with a singular purpose: get someone to say it out loud. Not behind closed doors, not in whispers, not as a vague memory, but as a fact. I saw the will. If I could get that on record, everything else would follow. But I also knew if I got too close, Dean would feel it, and he'd move fast. Graham and I had agreed on a low-profile approach. He'd reached Darlene Shaw, a former legal aide at Holden Pike's office, through a friend of a friend, someone she trusted just enough to show up, but not enough to feel safe. We didn't contact her directly. No emails, no texts. Just a third-party message with a time and place: a worn-out diner just off the highway, the kind where truckers passed through but no one paid attention to conversations. She came in clutching her bag like it was armor. Hair pinned up in a rushed twist, sunglasses still on though the place was dim. Graham was already seated, easy posture, quiet smile. I sat 2 booths away back to the wall facing the front door. Darlene kept looking over her shoulder, flinching when the bell above the door chimed. "Let's just talk through what you remember," Graham said softly. "From the beginning. You worked for Holden Pike when started in '98. Stayed until the end of last year." Her voice was scratchy, like she hadn't spoken much in days. "I handled client intake calendar coordination, some internal records. The confidential stuff mostly Holden kept under lock." Graham nodded. "Do you remember Mr. Silas Calloway coming in during the last months of his life?" "I do." Her eyes flicked to the window. "Came in late spring, looked tired, said he needed to update his paperwork. And did you witness him sign anything?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I saw him sign a last will and testament. I didn't read, it wasn't allowed. But I saw his signature. I saw Holden's. I saw the seal." The breath caught in my throat. Graham leaned in, slow and steady. "Where was it stored?" "In the steel file cabinet. The back one, left side, second drawer where Holden kept originals. That one has a double lock. Only he and Dean had the key." I scribbled a note in the margin of my mind. "Dean. Again." "What happened to it?" Graham asked. Darlene glanced at me for the first time. Her eyes, pale blue and tired, locked on mine. "After Mr. Calloway passed, Dean came into the office. He stayed behind closed doors with Holden. Next morning the drawer was empty, and when you asked, Holden told me not to go poking around. Said, and I quote, 'Your paycheck doesn't depend on what you remember, it depends on what you forget.'" Her voice cracked. That's when I knew something was wrong. She pulled her purse closer, dug deep, and produced a small envelope. "I don't know if this matters," she said, "but I always made backup logs for myself, old habit." Inside was a faded copy of the intake record, Mr. Silas Calloway will and testament dated. Logged, signed, initialed by her and Holden. It wasn't the will itself, but it was a breadcrumb, a real one, and it would lead to fire. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and went pale. "Don't answer it," I said. She didn't. But the message that followed, she didn't have to read it aloud. I could see the words reflected in her eyes. "You talk, you lose everything." We left 5 minutes later. Graham paid in cash. I hung back long enough to clock the black SUV idling in the back of the lot, tinted windows, engine running low. No plates on the front. Georgia plate on the rear. I memorized it. Didn't walk toward it, just let them know I saw them too. At Graham's office later, we logged everything. Darlene signed a sworn affidavit. Graham locked the intake log in a fireproof safe, made 2 copies, handed one to me. "Don't keep it at home," he said. "Hide it like it's a weapon, because it is." He was right. That night, Jules called with news that made my stomach drop. Dean had circulated an internal email at Calloway Holdings. "Caius is unstable. He's emotionally compromised. He is not permitted near company documents or servers." Rhett was already stepping in as transitional management. My name was being erased in real time. And when I got home, Marianne's house. Now my only safe place, I found something under the door. A strip of red ribbon. The same kind that used to be wrapped around my grandfather's old journal. I never told anyone about that ribbon. That's when I knew they weren't just trying to erase me. They were hunting me. The next morning, Graham and I met at dawn. The plan was simple: stay ahead of Dean for 48 hours, secure the documents, line up the witness protections, prep the injunctions, and most of all, don't lose the envelope. Then the invitation arrived. It was handwritten. Calligraphy, signed by Dean Calloway himself. "The Calloway family estate invites you to a formal announcement regarding succession planning and legacy stewardship. Attendance requested." I didn't need to read between the lines. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a trap. I went anyway. I didn't bring the original letter. I brought a scanned, time-stamped, notarized. I slipped it into my jacket pocket next to the copy of Darlene's intake log. and I brought my composure because I knew they wanted me to lose it. The estate was glowing like a Southern Gothic painting. Rhett greeted guests like royalty. Dean stood at the center of the great room, flanked by lawyers, managers, cousins who'd never worked a day in their life but had plenty to say about the family's direction. When they called for silence, Dean stepped forward. Today we confirm what our father intended. Stability, strength, order. Rhett will now serve as lead managing partner of the Callaway enterprise. Polite applause. Photographers. My blood boiled. Then Rhett turned to me, glass in hand, smile smug. Guess the older brother has to settle for poetry and rebellion, huh? I stepped forward. I won't take long, I said. But before you crown anyone, I want to raise one issue. One piece of unfinished business, my grandfather's actual final wishes. Silence. I read aloud a paragraph from the letter, the one Silas had handwritten to me, the one that said he feared what his sons would do, that he had signed a new will, that he left it in hands he trusted until he could put it in mine. Dean laughed. A fabricated letter from a grieving grandson. That's what this is. I turned to the crowd. If it's fake, let the court say so. Let a judge read the dates, the handwriting, the witness logs. Dean's face tightened. He made a small gesture, and security stepped forward. This man is in unauthorized possession of company property, said one of the lawyers. We are filing for immediate injunction and retrieval. There it was. The move. They wanted to provoke. Arrest me on sight. Paint me as the thief before I could file anything. I didn't resist. I have scanned documents and legal counsel, I said. If you want to escalate, I suggest you bring it to court. Then Rhett opened his mouth. Funny how he suddenly discovered this will after being passed over. Real convenient, huh, Dean? Just like when you had to, clean house after Silas passed, Dean shot him a look that could kill. But it was too late. Someone in the room had heard it, and someone would remember. Later, outside in the garden, Tessa Whitmore appeared beside me. She didn't speak at first, just slipped a folded paper into my coat. When you're ready to stop playing defense, she whispered, use this. It was an email. Dated 3 days after Silas's death. A meeting between Dean and Holden. Subject line, file resolution urgent. That night, Dean's lawyers served Mary Ann with a cease and desist, accusing her of withholding proprietary materials, claiming she was mentally unwell, unfit to advise or testify. She broke, told me everything. That Dean had cut off her access to finances years ago, that she'd been forced to stay quiet or risk losing what little she had left, that she had known about the will, but they made her believe no one would believe her. Now I did. By midnight, Graham had everything drafted: an emergency injunction, a formal motion to preserve the estate, and a subpoena list for internal Callaway records. I signed them all. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was survival. For me. For Mary Ann. For the truth. And it was going to court. The night before the hearing, Graham sat across from me in his office, sleeves rolled up, surrounded by stacks of files, color-coded charts, and a whiteboard covered in dates and arrows. He wasn't building a case, he was building a timeline, a straight line that made deception impossible to hide inside. Caius, he said, handing me a pen, walk me through everything one more time. Exact order, no emotion, just what happened and when. So I did. From the day Silas collapsed to the last afternoon, I saw him lucid to the moment Dean declared with ridiculous confidence that my grandfather died without leaving anything behind. I spoke until the events were no longer memories, but timestamps fixed, solid, unshakable. Graham turned my recount into 4 pillars. 1. Silas's intent, shown in his handwritten letter and the certified declaration tucked into the envelope. 2. My legal standing, is confirmed by the documentation acknowledging my status and my grandfather's explicit designation. 3. The existence of a will, supported by Darlene's testimony and the log sheet proving official handling of the document. 4. The motive and concealment, uncovered through internal company changes and the abnormal pattern of Dean's financial transfers. "These are the bones," Graham said. "You're not going in tomorrow as a grieving grandson. You're going in as the only person who actually knows where this story starts and what they tried to bury." Leaving his office close to midnight, I drove to Marianne's house. She didn't sleep either. She sat at the kitchen table, the original envelope locked inside a small metal case at her feet. When I told her I was ready for whatever came next, she reached over and squeezed my hand, something she hadn't done since I was a child. "You walk into that courtroom tomorrow," she whispered, "and you remember truth doesn't need volume, just clarity." Morning came cold and sharp. At the courthouse parking lot, I stepped out and immediately noticed a black sedan idling across the lane. Windows tinted, engine running low, watching without moving. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Pull back now, or someone you love gets hurt." I didn't reply. I didn't look around. I simply walked into the courthouse and put the phone in Graham's hand. He read the text and said quietly, "Good. Now it's on record." Inside, Dean entered like he owned the building. A navy suit, polished shoes expression carved from stone. Rhett followed half a step behind, jaw tight. Holden Pike looked ghostly exhausted or simply guilty, hard to tell. The courtroom filled with more people than I expected, local business figures, a few board members, others who simply wanted to see a storm break. When the judge entered, you could feel the air tighten. Graham opened the proceeding without theatrics. "Your Honor," he said, "this case is not about inheritance disputes or family disagreements. This is about whether legal documents were concealed, destroyed, or manipulated to benefit one party at the expense of the lawful heir." He submitted the emergency petition freeze, the estate compel production of all records connected to the will, initiate an investigation into possible concealment. Then it was my turn. When I took the stand, Dean glanced at me with a faint smirk, as if expecting me to crumble. Instead, I spoke slowly, cleanly, no flourishes. I described my relationship with Silas, how he taught me how to read blueprints, how he made me shadow engineers before letting me touch executive work. I described my role in the company long before Rhett ever stepped into a boardroom. Then I described the days after the funeral, how my access was revoked, how my office was emptied, how Dean convened a board meeting less than 48 hours after my grandfather's burial. Every piece lined up like dominoes. Next, Graham called Marianne. Marianne stepped forward with the metal case in her hands, opened it, and produced the original envelope. She testified clearly Silas had given it to her himself because he feared Dean. She had safeguarded it until the moment she believed I was in danger. Her voice trembled, but her words didn't. Then came Darlene. She walked in looking smaller than before, clutching her purse, but when the oath was finished, she stood straighter. She confirmed she had personally seen Silas sign a will. Confirmed she saw it placed into Holden's secure file system. Confirmed that Dean came to the office immediately after Silas passed and that the document vanished after that visit. She handed the photocopy of the intake record to the bailiff. A real paper trail, a real mark of existence. Holden shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Dean's jaw flexed. Then Graham introduced the data point from Tessa, the internal corporate email marking a meeting between Dean and Holden the day after Silas's death. Time-stamped, unambiguous. Finally, the financial records, 2 large transfers withdrawn by Dean from accounts tied to the estate within the 48-hour window when the will disappeared. When asked about them, Dean claimed they were routine, but his explanation contradicted paperwork already on file. The judge noticed. The final crack came from Rhett. During cross-examination, he butted in with a frustrated remark, something along the lines of, "Dad said he took care of it." Silence fell. Everyone heard it. Everyone understood what it implied. By the time closing statements finished, Dean looked less like a patriarch and more like a man watching his walls collapse. The judge leaned forward. In light of the evidence presented, she said this court finds substantial reason to believe that legal documents connected to Mr. Silas Calloway's estate may have been concealed or destroyed. Accordingly, the estate shall be frozen effective immediately. An independent investigation will be opened into actions by Dean Calloway and attorney Holden Pike. Witness protection considerations will also be reviewed. Her gavel struck wood like thunder. Dean turned toward me, eyes burning. "This isn't over," he whispered. But for the first time I believed the opposite. For the first time I felt the ground shift beneath him, not me. Savannah felt different after the hearing. The air seemed lighter, yet charged, as if the whole city was waiting to see how far the truth would reach. Within days, the fallout began. Board members who once refused to meet my eyes started calling Graham, asking about next steps, transparency, company stability. Investors pulled back from Dean. A few executives resigned outright, afraid of where the investigation might lead. Inside Callaway Built, the morale shifted. Employees started whispering not about me this time, but about Dean. About the frozen accounts. About the subpoenas arriving at the firm. The invincible image he'd crafted for decades cracked wide open. The investigation escalated quickly. Holden Pike was ordered to turn over all record logs. Investigators examined backups from his office server. When they retrieved partial metadata linking a digital draft of a will to Silas's client file, everything snapped into focus. Dean tried one last maneuver. He reached out through a third party, requesting a private meeting. "Let's settle this quietly," he said. "You can take a share. Just stop the investigation." He sounded less like a father and more like a businessman bargaining for time. I declined. His next attempt was worse. Lawyers filed a petition questioning Marianne's mental stability, trying to discredit her chain of custody. It backfired instantly. Graham dismantled the claim with medical affidavits and years of clean records. And that's where I'm leaving it. Not with a victory speech, not with a neat little ending tied up in a bow, but with the kind of quiet you feel after the storm finally passes. If we take anything from this, maybe it's that the hardest losses aren't always the ones that take something from us. They're the ones that make us question our place in the world. And sometimes the most human thing we can do isn't to punish or celebrate, but to rebuild slowly, carefully, with our dignity still intact. Because when the people closest to you try to erase you, it's easy to turn cold. But I've learned something: we don't heal by becoming harder than what hurt us. We heal by choosing clarity over chaos, boundaries over begging, and a little compassion, especially for the parts of ourselves that didn't get protected back then. If you made it to the end, thank you for sitting with me. If you'd like to be part of this space where we listen, share, and carry each other's stories without judgment, you're welcome here. Subscribe if you want to stay close. And if you feel like it, drop a few lines in the comments where you're watching from, or what part of this hit you the most. I read more than you think. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next story.